Apologies have been received from Deputies Rabbitte and Sherlock. I welcome members, also viewers who may be watching proceedings on Oireachtas TV to this public session of the Oireachtas Select Committee on Children and Youth Affairs. We are dealing with the supplementary estimates for Public Services Vote number 40, and the Dáil on the 21st of November 2018 ordered that the supplementary estimates for public services in respect to the following vote be referred to this committee for consideration, namely Vote 40, Children and Youth Affairs. Today's meeting of the Select Committee will consider the estimates and report back to the Dáil. The committee is required to report back to the Dáil no later than December 12th. On behalf of the Select Committee, I wish to welcome Dr. Kathleen Funchion, TD Minister for Children and Youth Affairs, who is accompanied by her officials, Dr. Farrell Lynch, Secretary General, Mr. Dermot Ryan, Assistant Secretary, Ms. Bernie McNally, Assistant Secretary, and Mr. Gerard Hughes, Principal Officer at the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, and I thank them for their briefing material. The proposed format of today's meeting is that we will deal with Vote 40 and the supplementary estimate which relates to subhead B4. General childcare programmes. At the outset of the consideration of the estimates, the Minister can give an overview of the programme and the requirement for the supplementary estimate. We will then open it up to the floor for members of the committee. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise nor make charges against a person outside the House or any official, either by name or in a way to make him or it identifiable. I remind members to please switch off their mobile phones, as they can interfere with the broadcasting and reporting of our meeting this afternoon. Members have already received a briefing document on the supplementary estimate, and I now invite the Minister to make her opening statement. Minister Sapone, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. And I want to thank the committee for making a time available today to consider the supplementary estimate for the Children and Youth Affairs vote. This supplementary estimate is, of course, required in respect of subhead B4, the general childcare programs. This subhead provides funding to subsidize the childcare costs of low and middle income parents and those accessing education and training programs. An additional €47.33 million is required in order to meet additional demand by parents for subsidized childcare costs as a direct result of this government's commitment to assisting parents to access affordable and quality childcare. This commitment led to what is now called the September measures. We've seen significant additional demand for childcare places as a result, and I will revert to these measures again just in a few moments. The committee, though, should note that it is projected that there will be an underspend of at least €27 million across other areas of the vote. This includes €15 million in once-off savings arising from changes made to the ECHI payment calendar. This reduces the net additional exchequer funding requirement to €23 million. That's the figure we're really talking about today. I would like now to expand on the reasons that the additional exchequer funding for childcare is required this year. The General Childcare Program provides funding for the Community Childcare Subvention, the Training and Employment Childcare Schemes, the Learner Fund, funding for county childcare committees and national voluntary childcare organizations, and the Shilta and the Ashtir supports. In addition, it provides for capital funding for the early years and school-age capital programs. Another important element of this subhead is the provision for development costs associated with the introduction of the Affordable Childcare Scheme in 2019. The Community Childcare Subvention, or the CCS program, is a demand-led scheme. There has been a notable increase in demand following an extensive communications and media campaign to inform parents and providers of improvements to the scheme in advance of the introduction of the new Affordable Childcare Scheme later in 2019. So these improvements were introduced in 2017 and included the introduction of a universal payment and an increase in subsidy rates across the different strands of the Community Childcare Subvention and the Training and Employment Childcare Schemes. These changes represent a major step towards accessible, affordable, quality childcare following decades of underinvestment in our childcare and early years sector. Ireland is reported as the most expensive country in the OECD for childcare for lone parents and the second most expensive for couples. According to the OECD research in 2016, Ireland spends just 0.5% of gross domestic product on early learning and care and education, including expenditure on under 6-year-olds in primary school, as opposed to the OECD average of 0.7%. The September measures include, first of all, a new non-means tested universal subsidy, which is available for all children aged between 6 months and 3 years of age or until they qualify for ECHI in registered childcare. This amounts to as much as €20 a week or 1,040 euros per year for children in full-time childcare. They also include enhanced supports of up to 7,500 euros per eligible child per year to assist families to return to employment or training or both, and education. These changes have been highly successful in bringing subsidized childcare supports to the parents of 13,000 additional children than originally provided for in Budget 2018. And this accounts for 29 million euros of the additional funding required in 2018. In addition, there's been a noticeable change to the mix or composition of the qualifying rates parents are entitled to, with more parents qualifying for the higher band A rate. And then in addition to that as well, we've seen an increase in parents availing of longer hours for childcare. This accounts for some 19 million euros of the additional funding required. These initiatives are leading to positive change for parents and children, and when measured in tandem with other childcare initiatives, such as the second year of ECHI and the introduction of the Affordable Childcare Scheme in November of 2019, we should see some improvement then in Ireland's position when measured against the OECD average. The remaining portion of the required supplementary estimate is of a technical nature. The reduced intake of receipts into the department's vote is to be offset against a corresponding reduction in expenditure on subhead B8, which is related to the intervention program for children, and subhead B9 related to the program for peace and reconciliation. So in conclusion, I recommend the supplementary estimate for the Children and Youth Affairs vote to the committee, and of course I'm happy to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Minister, you won't be surprised to hear that I have no criticisms whatsoever of additional funding being required within the department, because obviously a demand-led service as it is, I'm very heartened to see 13,000 above what the expectation was availing of this availing of these measures, and I think that's to be welcomed. I just have a couple of small queries. Sure. I think the Minister has, on numerous occasions in the House, outlined the quite stark level of underinvestment that has gone on over decades at this state. And I know there are a number of different schemes that will be coming to fruition, particularly in 2019-2020, which of course will require additional budgets. In terms of the 0.5% of GDP and the target, I think, which is in excess of 1%, could you outline to the committee the sort of long-term strategy that you have for getting us closer to that OECD average and ensuring that we can meet the demands of expectant parents or parents who might, or couples who might be thinking about it, because obviously this is something that's going to be of benefit to them in the future. So perhaps we'll start there and move on.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman, especially for the positive comments in relation to the progress to date. And I think one of the things that, for example, I know that the Taoiseach was queried in relation to some of these issues today, and, talked about the fact that we are on an incremental path in terms of increasing the investment, trying to move towards that target that you've identified. And having said that, incremental doesn't necessarily mean slow. I think that we've done some very rapid things in the last 3 or 4 years in terms of increasing investment to over 117%. That's my first point. Second point, though, is as you indicate there, in order to move up from the 0.5 or to the 0.7% in relation to the OECD, it will take a significant amount more of investment. My experience in terms of increasing it, I think rather rapidly in the last couple of years, has been to outline a rationale for the importance of finding additional monies to really prioritize the development of the infrastructure for childcare. In this past budget, I think the arguments that I made largely surrounded not only the importance of this kind of support for children in terms of their early learning and care and the developmental aspects of that, but in addition to that, that we need more investment in order to support any of our parents who wish to return to education and training, and that many of them are inhibited from doing so because of the fact that it still costs too much in order for them to feel that they are going to receive additional benefits for that. And yet, if we are, I think part of it what we're trying to do is identify estimates for each year where if we increase X percent, let's say, that will be enough to bring some of those people within who are trying to make a decision to go back to work, and also within enough period of time to plan for that it will make a difference, enough of a difference in order for them to do that, and that in doing this, taking this approach, it's not going to necessarily overheat the economy because we are spending in this way, because actually we're increasing our productive capacity. In addition to this, so those are some of the arguments that I gave this time, this past budget. As I think the committee is aware, we've also just recently launched the National Early Years Strategy for the next 10 years, which is called First Five. And I think it's in there that we identify not only the vision in terms of how we want to increase investment, but the rationale again for the approaches that we're taking in order to get much closer to that target. And so, of course, the Affordable Childcare Scheme is the main tool for that, and that we need to continue to increase both not only the subsidies per child per week, depending on the type of care that they require, but that we are also committed to increasing thresholds. And as I think Chair and other members are aware, is when you identify, let's say, a certain percentage of increases that you want to make for, I suppose, for families and in terms of incomes, et cetera, that helps you then determine, if we work back from that, the type of threshold that would be required in order to increase living standards for families in a significant way. So in relation to that particular aspect of answering your question, I think what I'm trying to say is we don't simply just say, well, we're going to try to get to 0.011% of increase next year, but instead we take a look at and try to calculate what do we require in order to have a meaningful increase in the living standards of families according to the family type that they are. That would be the I suppose a main aspect in terms of trying to calculate the figures, and I have so many people who do that well here with me today. We also are obviously going to I think another aspect of the increase in investment. I've always believed that it's not, it's important to talk about the average amount of percentage of increase that is required in order to build the childcare infrastructure. That's really important. But if we always average amounts, that we don't necessarily take account of the ways in which people are impacted differently because of the differential in terms of their family income. And so we will also be looking for increasing investment in order to get enough money to pay more into a new model that we want to develop in terms of early learning and care, which is what we call the DESH type model, where we give more investment in arenas which are required more, so in order to again assist leveling the playing field for our children. And then finally, in relation to that strategy, Chair, again, I'm not talking about percentages per se, but the rationale which we hope will enable and persuade the choice of government to prioritize even more significantly than we have in the past. And that has to do with the, I suppose, the development of a new funding model for the early learning and care services into the future, which will, we hope, find a way to invest more for more settings that can promise and are willing to contract to deliver higher quality, in return for, I think, ensuring modest fees for families as well as better pay and working conditions for their staff.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Minister. My final, penultimate question actually is in relation to, the department have been quite good, I think, to a certain extent anyway, at advertising some of the new schemes that are there.
Yes.
Usually bright and colourful, which is always eye-catching, which I think is important. I suppose I have to ask a rather blunt question. Do you think you're spending enough on advertising these schemes, notwithstanding the fact that we have 13,000 or 12,800 extra children participating, but I feel that we can never really do enough to try and promote these schemes and the uptake. What would your view be on that?
Thank you. Well, I think I have two parts to answer that question. The first one is that I think, it's implied in my opening remarks, that one of the reasons that we are that we need additional money, we need a supplementary estimate, is because of our information campaign in terms of those September measures increase the demand more significantly, I suppose, than anticipated. It's not an exact science, as we know. But secondly, I would say in response to that, so that's kind of to support the question that you're asking, in terms of the are we then putting aside sufficient budgets, particularly as we move into the introduction of the Affordable Childcare Scheme towards the end of 2019, and which we anticipate will again increase demand and will move us towards a whole new level of spending. I think that we do have a budget assigned to that. I think it's not just about the amount of money, but it's also about when we begin that campaign. And one of the things that we're considering now, I think in light of ongoing conversation and feedback from yourself and other deputies and officials, is that perhaps we should start it sooner than we originally anticipated. And therefore, of course, if you do that, it costs a little bit more money. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Just then, finally, in regard to some of the savings that have been made, quite significant savings.
Yes.
Just in terms of, where was it here?
Yes. In terms of your brief.
Sorry, bear with me. I had it in front of me a moment ago. Sorry, Minister, bear with me a moment. Youth Capital Scheme.
What? Sorry, the what?
Youth Capital Scheme. On B6 youth services, youth organisations and services, saving of 1.665 million. Is there anything? I mean, it says time-related savings for certain projects, less than anticipated demand for the scheme. When I see capital monies not being expended, no more so than I do when I see the Department of Education not spending in the past, I must admit, their capital budgets, I take an interest, I take a note, because clearly the infrastructure across the country in terms of these projects is critical. Is there a way in which you can envisage reducing? I would rather see an overspend than an underspend, given the situation we're in on the capital scheme. You might offer a comment, please.
Yes, thank you. I accept what you're saying there. I think that first of all, just a general comment. It's really important, particularly in relation to the youth sector, that there is that awareness that there's a certain amount of capital available. Obviously, you have to really plan ahead in order to spend capital, don't you? Exactly. And so what I might say is that, in light of your question, it would be good for us to just review again the way in which we communicate what's available, what type of schemes people can apply for, and to ensure that that's done in plenty of time for the people who are operating in relation to the youth. Secondly, I would say I think, at least in terms of the experience of this current year, that capital underspend, was due to a low uptake. That may have something to do with, though, just my initial comment there, in terms of the amount of time that's required for planning, as well as our own, as I said again, review to identifying what are the schemes, what's the top amount of money that you can apply for, and then assess whether or not as you would well know, usually you require some additional funds in order to raise that yourself. But the youth funding, certainly, the amount of youth funding for 2019 will be available. Again, that's not going to reduce on the basis of the savings per se in relation to 2018. Okay. So that's important to say, I think.
Thank you for that. Minister, have you, just as an aside, have you had the opportunity to review the committee's report on childhood obesity as of yet?
I have not.
No, okay.
No.
Well, there is a recommendation there in regard to, and in fact it's something that the Department of Social Protection are doing, which is in relation to school meals. One of the observations that was made by the early childhood sector to me following the publication of our report was the need for either guidelines or direction, at least from the department, in relation to foods being certain food types being offered to children in HE schemes and or early other supported schemes across the country, community childcare schemes, etc., etc. Is that something, obviously slightly unrelated to this section of the estimates, but is it something that the department has considered, or is it something that the department might consider in the future?
Yes, I think, my understanding is that one of our officials, Dr. Anne-Marie Brooks, contributed to the Department of Health Policy, and that First Five really has a commitment around the issue of guidelines in early learning and care settings, and the specific set of referring to those kinds of guidelines that you're raising now, I think would be integral to that, and is on our
So it's on your radar.
Plate. Absolutely.
It's something you envisage being introduced in the future.
I think I think so, yes. And what I would say as well is that we certainly, in light of your raising this question now, that I will take a look at that myself personally and see how that connects in with our plans. First Five. No, fair enough.
It's a minor, it's a bit part, but I think it is an important part given the effects of unhealthy eating can have at a very early age, and the effects that it have on a child's progression. Well, I think, are there any other comments then, or questions before we conclude then? Does the Minister wish to make any closing remarks, or?
Well, I think the only two things I guess I would say is I think this is the first year since 2014 that we haven't had a balanced budget, and so I've been certainly since I've taken over the ministry very, very pleased with the way in which the monies have been managed, for a department, and this in relation to particularly this aspect of the spending of the money, which is demand-led, and you can assess on the basis of lots of research that comes in from different settings that there's always going to be a fluidity then in that regard. But even with that, I think the department has done an excellent job, and in terms of doing that, and I'm very pleased about that, and that certainly we can see that even with our 2018 requirement, because the demand is greater, which is actually a positive in my view. The demand is greater. At the same time, we have found a way to ensure that there are still savings across the entire vote and that are not forced. A lot of them are significantly time-related, so that I think that demonstrates really very strong fiscal management of the budget.
Okay. Thank you very much, Minister. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you and your officials for your attendance this afternoon. As we've now completed our consideration of the supplementary estimate for vote 40, the clerk will send a message to the effect of the clerk of the Dáil in accordance with Standing Order 90. Under Standing Order 89.2, the message is deemed to be a report of the committee. So the selected committee is adjourned. It's in a day. Thank you.